我中间的这些是和大家，让多年就是从这个把那小子的把给我今天给我给我的月高我给我他们，我们领导这个把从这中间的这个往上的文化外上。去多少多些我那些方面在我这很多人才听到我们他们出面的出去说那些看我这上去那个公安全部知道我一起当作是我那么就没有什么方面我给我去这这不知道这边大约是怎么着我这也不知道什么什么这那边出的我的这这边话他这这边的话我也没叫做是那些他们的传统是别人没说的这路的那这个话心就是来着真的这路那样的阿拉的心里那么一个的别人来呀也就是有了不错做吧还有这个人民从这个话也要干嘛那边嘛前方是我是我的地方我的这个有些是呢这个的是呢的看见是吧我的去年的对的阿爸去的是不是做那个的我就说了小孩子我这个大约的嘛中间的照片和讲的包括人给什么，他就是给的这个的他这个是中间的什么，那我是可以这个拿去给然后这创作什么这也是我最适合去考虑的什么什么计划。那么那些包括的大来呀，这些包括别人曾经是为了最大的下面，他说什么，现在是别结果现在是考虑的他们给我别这个有一些他说什么。现在是我自己知道的话，什么的别不管的日子嘛，上面过日子过，现在是话都怎么这个给我的话，别的都我谢谢最后把我的也是这个也来讲这些也许我说这些也就我是包括我是也都是去我们今天给我小刘我这个帮忙你那个主要的这些不是帮忙是吧？这个他们这边也没有的说他们这个人家们这个多毕业他们毕业我是他们让那个马人我什么把这个就是好的然后我也是有为什么我不知道的哪里也是东方的好的我是我跟大家就是说这个是的这个就是我第一是我们的张妈咪的这个我们的是我们那个他这个律师的他们是从也是说去他们都是别人让我们把然后我这里就是我们这个啥这原来不是去他们都是 我这边老板这边嘛，每天老板这边，每天他这边都是我这边嘛，每天老板给我这边，这个地方我这边啊，没问题啊，我的老板，我的公司，我的我的说。下列我来整理资料，来记录的这些好多掌握了他们的教务这些这些毕业的这些很多资料，好多今天我说的其实我真的来说这些嘛，这些我给这些这他们这些好多都是把什么给来的，这是我那个就是今天这个这两天我下来的这个成就什么？这是我这个我的办法，这个中间就是过了我的他们这个我们从这个我第二个，我们上个月工作上个月我就是说，关于我这个那个创业观的这些，我也说，也只是说，第一个经常叫，对吧？这些可能做就是这个是那什么的，说，什么的我说我的不是好。这些才是我们的理啊！只有这个会做人，我造业我家的，我也当我有些多的当主主他一些给我去的我上去去。就是我也有个我的名字，我这经过两个人我知道，两个人我去，80人我，2个人我去，这些我也包括也把这么多也就是我，我给我，就是我也把我说的那么远，只如此怕别人我做了那个这些我感觉现在我的这个，我这个地方有些有些我这个天津今天我这里跟我做个什么的，这个这个方式上我是什么我就不知不觉的我记住，虽然我父母的房子给他们的现在他的，我就我去我的记忆我的。才是追思
Chanju Samba Sambachibu, Papa Jedesi, Uchuki, Chanju Samba Sambachibu, Papa Jedesi, Uchuki, Shari Dadi Bola, Igashimos. What do you mean? Oh, the Chanju Samba Sambachibu, Chanju Samba Sambachibu, Chanju Samba Sambachibu, love you, Sambachibu, where he is, Hassala. Habasasu Susa, Yamabu, Chuba. Or Habasasu, Bayachikani, now Alamoni, Tolam in Jessa, in Jenna. Alamoni, that's Susu, Tolam Bolam, Milu Single Tolam Bolam, or the agenda, or Chanju Chuba, Chanju Samba Chamu, our Cheris, Uchuki, that's it that the question is the village for less, or the village place of which you have a share of Idan number Tawa Chades, or that is the Sam Jawa teacher, or the Sam Jawa teacher, that can give all kinds of our Cheris Uchuki, said that the Machine Dadi Mula, other countries, yes, or the teacher what? When you reach a share of Uchuki, Idan number Tawa Chades, or this something really about this. This should go, this should go more. Sanjay, so Sanjay, Chulu, Jita, Ali Caso, Cosata, Pedela, read it so my until Captain Kaniji in there, that is Sanjay, you were you did, and he should go, he should post a category, and Kala Sheriff for the nobody, other the Telesta, yes, that's Choba, the Viki. And this time was another tower channel. Yes, to move out Deda Lions and to move out Deda Lion. To move out Deda Jams. Other than the country is to move out Deda Jam. Ranshi number. Yana just was. What do you get? Tama Yageti, Tama Yageti, Casu, get our lions, Puma, get our lions, now that the Puma of Teta, Gangs, Ganga. We do that at the Tama Yagasura, and the cheaper, Nayang, Gangas, Gangyang, Ansu, Gangyang, Ansu, Chick, Casu, Gangs, you do that, and never much chick, Mase, Chicks, Lions, Borba. But you do that at the most of money there. That is what is not. Khensur Rangshin to do the power of the Mase. Khensur Khanga, Tashi, Puma, Geda, Gangs. What a day will be Kaje. As a curriculum was not. Khensur Dami, should be Dami Niga, or that Tingi Kaje, some judge in never do. Khensur Dami, should be Dami Niga, Tingi Yovati. That is the Puma Geda Life, Geda Gang. Other Khensur Rashi to the Tuba, Rashi to the Tuba Tower of the Master, Tuba Geda, Tuba Geda Rashi to the another just yes, already some judge. Some judge, or some judge. It got there. But it got there. Some judge, sometimes with other activity, because about the Chinese to said that the machine to the source or the reward. That country don't get down, I think neither can be the
So we're continuing this morning with the explanation of the Heart Sutra. And so yesterday in the afternoon, mainly we were talking about the nature of the so-called lengshi in Tibetan. It means kind of the description of the circumstances, identifying the circumstances in which the discourse was given. And so there was the first part of it was sort of a standard description of the time and the place and the teacher and the audience, the gathered monks and other bodhisattvas, and then the specific introductory part was identifying what were the circumstances specifically under which the exchange, the discussion between the interlocutors, Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara, what is it that caused them to have the discussion that is the heart of the discourse itself, the Sutra itself. And so that was saying, well, the Buddha was engaged in meditation on profound concentration about emptiness, and this was served to inspire or bless Shariputra's mind and prompted him to ask the question of Shariputra, which was, how is it, what was the nature of the practice that Shariputra was engaged in? And as part of that, it also said that, described no specific dialogue per se, but it said also that Shariputra was, at that time, was engaged in profound practice of Prajnaparamita, in which he was perceiving the nature, the ultimate nature of the five skandhas, which is that they lack any self-existent nature. And so then Shariputra asked him, well, what is it? How is it that someone else, anyone else, any son or daughter of the family might want to follow your example and cultivate the same practice that you're meditating on? So that question then is also part of this unique description of the circumstances under which the sutra took place, the discourse. So then following that is the answer. That is how Shariputra answered. So then the main body of the sutra then is addressing the nature of practice, and so that then is a transition into the sutra itself, the main teaching. And so in the outline, again, we're following the commentary of the Jorden Lama Prakashedru. So it says in that, so that is now going to the main part. So there were three main parts to the sutra. The first one was that introductory part. The second part is the actual teaching which Shariputra gives, which is where we've reached now. And so that is described as having four sections to it. It says there is the main actual teaching is explaining in a sosarchete, means in a let's say making separate distinctions, how to practice it. And so that separate distinctions means the distinctions are how the person, the bodhisattva, male or female, is practicing Prajnaparamita during there's the five paths. Mahayana path is made up of five main levels. So the first two are the non-Arya levels. So it's called Chobalam, which is the path of accumulation, and Jorden, sometimes called the path of preparation. So the first of these four explanations addresses those two levels of the path. Then the second one the second division of the answer is addressing how the person is practicing Prajnaparamita when he or she achieves the so-called path of seeing, Tonlam. And Tonlam is when the practitioner directly perceives emptiness and that achieves that level of direct realization and so on. Then the third one is the so-called path of meditation, which is all the subsequent practices in the Sutrayana system to proceed to progress along the 10 bhumis. And then all of that after the seeing path represents the so-called path of meditation. And so that's the third category. And then the fourth category that's described is what is the nature of the Buddhahood that is what is the nature of Buddhahood that is achieved by relying on practice of perfection of wisdom. And so there's a latter part of it saying this, all the Buddhas of the 3 times, that have achieved Buddhahood have done so by practicing it. So that's addressing the attainment of the ultimate goal on the basis of this practice. So that's really the main body of the sutra itself, divided in those categories in that way. So then the first one is the beginner's way of practicing. And according to the outline, it says there is a sort of a transitional statement in which Shariputra then is not speaking, but the sutra says, actually, I'm sorry. And then, let's see. Yeah, the first thing that Shariputra says is, I'm not Shariputra, Avalokiteshvara says is, then this is, Degeche Meva. Degeche Meva means, having said that, after Shariputra has said, how does a person, a practitioner, Bodhisattva, practice perfection of wisdom? And so that's the question that initiates the teaching. So then the response to that begins with this transitional statement in which Avalokiteshvara begins to give his answer by saying the following: having been asked that, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, then said to Sedandemba, means the long-lived one, or Ayushman, is an honorific Shariputra. O Shariputra, any son or daughter of good family who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom should recognize the following. Okay, so that part is the transition from the question to the answer, and is kind of a lead-in to what he actually said. So in Spanish, it's called Samjor. Samjor means sort of making the transition from the question to the answer. And so then that's the first part of this first section on how a beginning practitioner practices perfected wisdom. So then the second part is the actual answer, the actual teaching, then is this first category. So before that, then the text is saying that then, as the commentary says, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to explain how a person practices on the first 2 paths, the first 2 levels of the path, maybe the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. And so there's several terminological, points that can be made. One is that this expression, son of good family or daughter of good family, Riki Buang, Riki Bumo, right? So then Rik then is means is a term that normally refers to a person's heritage, their family background. So then one of the points that's made about Buddhism is that Buddhism is not, what do you say, is a is a tradition that does not make any distinctions about caste, does not make any distinctions about then the person's background. That is something that is so I would say it's open to all beings, regardless of their station in life. And so the term person of good family is given a spiritual interpretation, which means someone who has the capacity to enter the family of spiritual practitioners who will who have the ability to proceed towards enlightenment. It's not anything about social standing. It has nothing to do with the person's background, family background. So that's one point. So so it's pointed out that in the Mahayana Sutra, the Mahayana system also is open to all persons. Doesn't matter. It's not a requirement to be an ordained nun or monk. That lay people can also be practitioners, bodhisattvas. Practicing. That's an element of the Mahayana teaching, which is, I think, specific to this tradition. That's one point. All of that can flow out from explaining the term son or daughter of a good family. Then the other term that ought to be addressed is that we use the word bodhisattva, which is familiar, right? Bodhisattva, meaning the person who has the aspiration to achieve enlightenment, but it doesn't stop there. It uses the term mahasattva, great spiritual being. And so there are various terms. So that's how Shariputra addresses Avalokiteshvara. So mahasattva means not an ordinary bodhisattva. It means a great being, a great spiritual being, a great bodhisattva. And there are generally two ways of interpreting the word mahasattva. So one says, and the bodhisattvas who have reached what is called the pure state, daksha. Daksha means pure, sa means stage. And so that's a reference to the 10 bhumis. Among the 10 bhumis, the first 8 or first 7 rather, are madapesa. So the term impure Arya Bodhisattva stages. But once they reach the 8th stage, that's a huge difference. It's a huge difference to go from a non-Arya to an Arya. And it's also a huge difference to go from the 7th Bodhisattva stage to the 8th Bodhisattva. So according to one interpretation, it's a term that's used for those Bodhisattvas in the 8th, 9th, and 10th stage. Another says, is more inclusive. It says, no, it can be understood to mean any of the Arya Bodhisattvas. So any Bodhisattva who reached the Tonla, reached the seeing path, and entered the Arya status, attained the Arya status, and that person can be referred to as a Mahasattva, a great Bodhisattva. So these are some of the points that should be made in relation to this part of the text. And then also, what you went on to say, then in beginning, in the discussion of how to practice on the first 2 paths, the non-Arya state, the pre-Arya state, is the accumulation and preparation state, then that has 2 parts to it. It has a brief presentation, and then it has a more expanded presentation. So the brief presentation of the practice is, or is it? So up to there, that first statement, which is he or she, meaning the son or daughter of good family, and that's added as a subject, saying that that person who wants to practice initially, right, should perceive that the 5 keeps or the 5 skandhas are empty of any essential nature, empty of any real essential nature. He or she should perceive. Then in the Sanskrit, then again is the I guess it's a conjunction. I don't know, my grammar is, I'm not. So it uses the word and. So it says any son or daughter of family, a good family, who wishes to practice profound perfection in Buddhism should recognize the bond. And he or she should perceive that the 5 heaps are empty of any real sense. So the question was, what is that and doing? It can be explained a number of ways. In the commentary here, it says, then the 5 skandhas can be focused on individually, right? Each one of them individually. Among the 5, then the heap, the skandha of form, the skandha of feeling, skandha of conception, skandha of formation, skandha of consciousness. Each one of them individually, one can practice them as being empty of any real essential nature, as form, as feeling, and so on. Or, in addition to that, one can practice that all 5 of the skandhas taken together, right? And so the fact that it doesn't mention the 5 skandhas individually in the sutra, it just starts out by saying all 5 of the skandhas should be recognized, should be perceived, should be comprehended as being empty of any real essential nature. So that, and the 5 skandhas, one explanation that's given to it is that if you take the 5 skandhas individually, then that represents essentially what's called chirkitangmi, right? There's 2 kinds of selflessness. There's the selflessness of the person and the selflessness of entity. And usually in Mahayana, it's the selflessness of entities alone that is understood to be a reference to emptiness. The selflessness of the person, in many other Buddhist schools, not taken to be equivalent to the same emptiness that is being asserted of the 5 skandhas individually. But this interpretation is from the Prasangika school. So it says, in addition, so implicitly, in addition to each of the 5 skandhas being empty of any self-existent nature, the 5 skandhas altogether as well are empty of any self-existence. And the importance of that is that the 5 skandhas collectively are the basis of ascription for forming the perception of a personal self. They're the dashi for the personal self, right? You experience your 5 skandhas collectively, and based on that experience, you form this notion of your own individuality. And so it's saying that when the sutra is referring to the 5 skandhas collectively, it's saying not only is it teaching the emptiness of the 5 skandhas, which is the selflessness of entities, but it also is teaching the selflessness of the person by referencing the 5 skandhas taken all together. So that's an interpretation for this introductory statement about how one practices perfection of wisdom at this first beginner stage of the path. So that's an important point which can be expanded on.
동안 유튜브 두 중이셔. 동안 유튜브 3중이셔. 어디지? 저는 부르셔. 동안 유튜브 2중이셔. 남자나 유튜브 아니지. 가서 신나 유튜브 남도하고 해가지고 조남스를 또 들려도 되니까 이제 내가 이제 이제 조남 우주에 이제 내가 이제 조남게 주스. 조남 내가서 가서까지 소주 조남도 조남 얘기가 내가서 뒤집듯이 주는 주장은 무슨 통도다 뒤집듯이 제외도 무슨 통도다. 다시 조남지 내가서 다 무슨 통도다. 그거 되고 무슨 통도다. then one there was also told the most single to what the dish is just
awesome. So again, in this introductory statement, which is again, it's just saying he or she should perceive that the five skandhas are empty of any real essential nature. So in this introductory statement, this preliminary statement, the word is should perceive. Kita nama tahu cantik. Yang dapat, yang dapat justru tahu. So yang dapat instead yang dapat means correctly, right? Yang dapat unerringly. Just tahu means then should perceive. The verb to perceive. So should perceive unerringly that the five heats aren't of any essential nature, right? So what does that mean? So in what way can emptiness be perceived? So then the first distinction about the ways of practicing direction wisdom is presented or introduced here in this brief presentation, saying during the accumulation path and during the preparation path, the practitioner is not able to perceive emptiness directly, not until they achieve the seeing path. So what is the nature of perceiving emptiness during the accumulation path and the preparation path? So then one can then explain that using the distinction of the three types of wisdom. So there is wisdom, listening wisdom, Tojungishira. There is wisdom born of reflection, which is Samjungishira. And then there is wisdom born of meditation, which is Gongjungishira. And those are significantly different. Now, in this case, we're talking about the first two paths, and all three forms of those wisdom, those types of wisdom, occur as one proceeds through the first two paths. So during the beginning path, or in the accumulation path, then you enter the accumulation path when you generate bodhicitta. Then you start to accumulate virtue essentially by learning, by receiving instruction. And so the first level of knowledge that you have of emptiness is what you gain by hearing instruction from a teacher. And that is Tojungishira. Then Tojungishira can be a correct understanding without being a form of inferential knowledge. So that would occur first. And that is really only correct belief. There's only a form of belief, albeit a belief that represents a correct understanding of what emptiness means. That's one point. Then in relation to that, they're saying, well, how do you perceive emptiness as a belief? So there's this epistemological term, which is mentioned here. It's a Denji Zulgi Tok. So Tok means to realize or perceive or understand or comprehend. Then Denji Zulgi means by way of something that's called Denji. And Denji is not an easy word to translate into English. It has to do with the way concepts are formed in the mind. So a Denji is a kind of a mental image.
소소 대사 소소한테 내려. 소소 강반도 최대 내려. 삼하고 또 뒤집 강반에 그 뒤집세 뒤집세. 이거는 아주 하나님을 뒤집세 딱 저마치 진짜로 뒤중세라고 딱 저마치 그 정도한테 제일 대화때에다 동안이 내대해서 또가 대화때에 동안이 전화지 보여줘. 뒤집세 딱 대화 동안이 또 뒤중세를 또가 뒤중세를 본인도 뒤중세를 제서 쇼되나 또같이 되나 다시 하지. 제가 사진을 찍고 다시 선중시랑 다시 선중시랑 다시 찍어서 주고 선중시랑 한 네번이요. 요새 민주성 대라 시내에 공주가
내가 시내
하는 집에
So this is a really important sort of distinction. So understanding something by way of a conceptual image, it means when you're listening to somebody talk about the meaning of emptiness, so you hear the words, you associate meaning with the words that you're hearing, and you're forming ideas in your mind. So those ideas are the conceptual image. So for example, if you're sitting here and you're thinking, for instance, hopefully you're keeping your mind on the class, but if your mind starts thinking about, where's something in my house, right? You're not here at your house, but you're thinking about your house, right? So when you're thinking about your house, then you have an image in your mind of, there's something that's in the kitchen. I forgot something, it's sitting there in the kitchen. Then that's some kind of conceptual image, right? So this is not necessarily conceptual image in the form of, pictures. It's not necessarily some kind of, visual imagery involved. It's mental imagery in relating to ideas. And so you're taking the words that you're hearing through your ear, and you're processing it and developing some kind of understanding. Oh, this is what they're saying. This is what it means. And that's what means Donjitsu thought. So in the very beginning, that understanding using conceptual images has a certain vagueness to it. There's a lot that can be said about it, what the implications are of this kind of understanding, but this is the basic one. At the level of wisdom born from listening, the main characteristic of it is that it's not certain. You do not know with a certainty that emptiness is valid. Emptiness is really true. You're understanding it and you can believe it, but you don't know through your own light for certainty that it's true. So in that sense, it has epistemologically the strength of a belief. So, but you work on it. You listen to it. You try to hear more about it. You refine your understanding of it. And then, necessarily, you need to employ correct arguments. You need to use rikpa, right? The correct types of arguments that prove the validity of that assertion, of that, that idea, that doctrine, that claim. So when you begin to use your own reasoning powers to refine that listening understanding of emptiness, at some point, if you do it properly, then you can gain a form of understanding that is a correct inference, correct inferential determination that in fact the proposition of emptiness is, you understand it with certainty to be true. And nothing could, change your mind because you have developed that sufficient level of certainty of understanding. And that level of certainty of understanding is a huge change from just listening wisdom. That represents the wisdom. So as you refine it, all of that is developing the wisdom born of reflection. But that wisdom born of reflection culminates with that correct inferential understanding. Okay? So in truth, you cannot really meditate on emptiness correctly or meaningfully or in the ideal way unless and until you gain that correct inferential understanding. So it's very important to refine your listening understanding to the point where it becomes a form of correct inferential knowledge. Now, at the level of correct inferential knowledge, it's still a conceptual image. It's just an image that is correct and valid and supported by reason. And you have a sense of actual certainty about that understanding. At that point, then you have to practice one-pointed meditation on that inferential understanding. You have to develop shamatha. Then you meditate, cultivate one-pointed concentration, and even beyond just one-pointed concentration, you reach a level of one-pointed concentration that is designated as shamatha, which has some special qualities of ease associated with it. That level of concentration becomes especially strong. Again, it's still a one-pointed concentration on that conceptual understanding. Once you achieve shamatha in relation to that correct conceptual understanding, then you can begin to cultivate vipassana, patong. That's wisdom. So then on the platform of vipassana, then you begin to try to penetrate more deeply into that conceptual understanding to get at its underlying nature. And then at that point, when you're practicing shamatha and vipassana together, then you transition from the path of accumulation to the path of preparation. And your wisdom takes on the quality of the wisdom that is born of meditation. So and that becomes more experiential. It's still not direct experience. It's still based with some kind of dualistic image. That emptiness seems to be some object distinct from your mind, and you're looking at it. So all of these kinds of meditation are fundamentally different. All these kinds of understanding are fundamentally different, and they are, have to be refined and developed throughout the first two stages, accumulation and preparation. Then as you refine that correct conceptual understanding, and it becomes more and more deeply experienced, then you are progressing towards the path of seeing, at which time you gain the direct realization of emptiness, which is non-dual, in which there is no awareness of your mind perceiving emptiness. There is this merging of the mind with the object in a non-dual way, and that marks the attainment of the path of seeing. And that's the second of the four categories: how you practice perfection wisdom in such a way that you reach the path of seeing. Beyond that, then all the levels of path of meditation, where you practice in a non-meditative state to cultivate other paramitas to increase the virtue that will allow you, when you meditate on emptiness directly, to destroy more and more of the subtle obstacles to omniscience. And that way you gradually improve your experiential understanding of emptiness, in addition to the post-meditative practices that are carried out on each of the bhumis. And then that process culminates with the destruction of all even the most subtle obstacles, at which time you become enlightened. And that's the fourth of the sections, or the fourth stages that are addressed in the sutra in relation to the nature of practicing perfection.
동바 동바시 내가 가제 가서 라왕이 중요하다. 원인이 중요하다. 그걸 랑싱이 중요하다. 동바시 따라서 내려게 되시고 그럼 동바 레스나 가지 동바 레스 이거 가서 코랑을 중요하다. 수 나도 아니 수 코랑을 중요하다. 수 코랑을 중요하다. 아니 라왕이 수 동바 없어. 동반이 수수 배우기 수 동반 인장 수 동반이 수수 수거는 남신이 동반 매나 아니 정신이 동반 매나 수거는 남신 동반 많이나 아 수거는 자와 제하고 하니 수기 자와 제하고 어디 하니에서 자와 제하고 수기 따와니 누구 매 수기 남신이 동반 인장 수비 남신이 동바 인자 아니 그런 라왕도 동바 인자 셰드 땡고 라왕이 매 라왕이 두배 인자 다 셰드 땡을 두고 그랬어 셰드 땡 라왕이 두고 동바 인자 동바 될라되는 수비 샤도야 또 라왕이 두고 동바 될라되는 지금 수샤고 그래서 라왕이 두고 얘는 전화나시 가요나 그러나 때때도 수 전화나시 가요는 양에 대가 미루시 그거도가 매치고 나시 도가 매치고 나시 도가 매치 전화나시 가요나 양에 대가 미루시 랑신세죠 매우 사요 나시 도가 매치 랑신세죠 나와 랑시 당신이 또 가져로 찍으세요 와 당시 도가 매치 전화나시 가요나 최다시 당시 도가 변해서 전화나시 가요나 양에 대가 미루시
Tadi kalsa. Center.
양에 대가 수요를 따르는 당시 도요나 용어의 당시 용어가 당시 최근에 당시 용어랑시 도가이나 용어가 가서 생리 당시가 용어 야외쇼 이 매버셔야 됩니다. 아니 와, 이 매버셔야 되는 참. 이 양에 대한 미루시. 양에 대 너무 매버셔면 양에 도야 되는 참. 와, 이 양에 대한 미루시. 어디 넘어? 제가 이 전화나시 가요는 양에 대한 미루시. 두고도가 미루시. 두고도가 미루시. 제가 너야 되는 것이 어디 Orang kasih orang langsing itu, tomba injang, tomba telat tene, ini kayu. Suku orang lawang itu mere injang, siapa tene jauhi, ini suku orang ada lebih kecil, suku Jawa kan siapa dua deh, orang dua orang lawang itu mere injang, itu suku kasih orang suku tomba ini berjanji. 와, 수동과 동반이
생기.
동반이는 신 나와는 주로 동반이 생기 수비로 왜 대장 그래서 타기 수비로 해야 돼 민간 타기 수비로 해야 돼 와, 이제 다리수 동반이 수비가 동반이 제일 많이 있어 다 수비 동반이 제일 많이 있어 다 민간 타기 수비로 민간 타기 수비래 아니 간에 따라 답변제를 미주 매매 라고 동바 줘봐 수비들도 간에 따라 답변제를 답변제 미주 매매 아니 동바지 줘봐 어디니 가서 수련 동바지 쉐면 비 수련 없어 됐어 딱 합수는 뭐요 아니 동바지 수시 많이 넣으시고 가서 간에 따라 답변제를 미주 나오는 미주 매매 동반이 대례를 놓쳤지 아니 민간 따위를 좀 넣어 보라고 했어. 같이 하고 딱 오지가 똑같이 했어. 어디 가족이 어디 편에서 같이 보고하고 이렇게 진짜 뭐야 가면 딱 가장 문제 세죠. 가장 문제 제가 가장 잡주로 어디 너무 같이 잘 줘라. 너무 같이 되게 해서 줘라. 어디 요약이 되거든요.
So after this this brief statement that all the 5 skandhas should be perceived correctly as lacking any real nature, then following that is the initial distinction that should be understood as then being interpreted in relation to the first 2 paths. So that begins a discussion of specific formulation about how to explain emptiness. And in this case, the first significant one, is probably the most famous one that people are familiar with, is saying form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Then emptiness is not distinct from form, and form is not distinct from emptiness. So those 4 statements are then Samo. In this country, I don't know if it's a well-known phrase. It's Samo Shijoro. Samo Shi means the 4 profound applications that are made, or in this case, they're assertions that are made as a way of explaining what the nature of emptiness is and how it should be understood. So the first one is saying that the form is an entity which is an ordinary appearance. So with those I use the word Ngawang, right? Then that Ngawang means there are the phenomena that appear to the mind, that are perceived objects. So form is one of them. They're elements of our ordinary experience. In the case of our own physical body, we can say form. The form that is represented by our own physical body, then it's saying about that form, that perceived entity, saying what the assertion is made, it is, when saying that it's empty, what it's saying is that the status of the perceived entity, the status of the object of our experience is, it is merely something that appears to our ordinary mind, which does not, by its nature, analyze or consider what the ultimate nature of that perceived entity is. That's very important because it is, what it's talking about is it's talking about the nature of the 2 truths. So the objects of our ordinary experience are relative truth entities. And what is the status of relative truth entities? The status of relative truth entities is not that they don't exist, but that they only exist in the manner in which they appear to a mind that does not question what its ultimate status is. So it's a mata machebe tanyebe lo. So tanyebe lo means a conventional mind, a mind that we make use of in our everyday lives. And that ordinary mind really observes ordinary experience and makes determinations about what's going on in ordinary experience, but it's not asking what's the ultimate nature of this form that I'm perceiving. So it says mata macheva. That's very important in the Prasangika philosophy. Is saying it's a non-analytic form of awareness. And so it's the fact that that dualistic mind does not make some assertion or assumption about the ultimate status of the relative truth object is what allows you to say that the relative truth object exists. It exists only in the sense that it is the object or entity that's perceived by those non-analyzing forms of ordinary experience. Then, so that's then taking that as the starting point, then as a person who wants to understand the ultimate nature of things, then you engage. It says Dendam Dendam means ultimate nature. Means then we have another aspect of our mind which we can activate and which can inquire. Well, what is the ultimate status of these things that are appearing to our minds in ordinary experience? Are they in fact the way they appear? They appear to be self-existent. They appear to exist separately from our perception of them. Is that true? So then you begin to apply the type of reasoning that is trying to determine what the ultimate status is of those ordinary appearances. That says that mind, then that mind very much engages in some kind of analysis, engages in some kind of investigation. And that mind, what it does is, then it uses the phrase, Tanye Tak Dun. Tanye Tak Dun means the object which conventional mind ascribes, creates, so to speak, through processing sensory experience, then that is the object of the conventional mind. Tanye Tak Dun means that entity tells it, means that it tries to find what, if it is real, what does the essence, what is the reality that identifies that object as being real. And that process of analysis, as it's engaged in, means it fails to identify anything that corresponds to the ultimate nature of that ordinary object. And that lack of finding is in fact the finding of emptiness. There's a famous phrase, so the fact that you don't find any ultimate nature is the finding of reality of emptiness. So that's what the second part is saying. First part is describing the relative truth object, form, and then you unpack that to be, well, what is the status of relative truth objects? That they only exist conventionally. They only exist as the ascription of a dualistic mind. Then the assertion that's made about that relative truth object is it lacks any real nature. So as it appears to have a real nature, but it lacks that. That's false. And so that determination is the emptiness that's asserted of form. It's not saying there is no form. It's saying there's no form in the way that appears to be a self-existent form. And so that's the first of this profound application. Then the second one is Dongwen Yisukso. Dongwen Yisukso is saying it's looking at it in reverse. Then it's saying something very important. It's saying that emptiness does not mean it's not annihilating things. It's not saying things have no reality to them, and they have no conventional validity to it. They have no ability to act at the level of ordinary experience and cause and effect. And it says, so we say emptiness is form. It means emptiness does not invalidate form. Emptiness, while the thing is empty, the object is still able to appear. While the thing lacks any self-existent nature, nevertheless, to a conventional dualistic mind, it still has the capacity to appear, and there is a consistency in our ordinary experience. So what is really implied by that is that emptiness itself is the very condition which allows us to give a meaningful account of the elements of ordinary experience, cause and effect. In particular, the two elements of ordinary experience that we need to understand properly is what's the process by which samsara is perpetuated. What is the process by which we are subject to the mental affliction? And number one. And number two, what's the process that makes it possible for us to be able to free ourselves of the mental affliction? So the doctrine of emptiness has to be consistent with both of those propositions. And so then Rinpoche was saying that if things were not empty of a self-existent nature, then it would not be possible for someone to achieve nirvana. Nirvana itself is possible because things are empty. So that's what you need to understand about the second assertion, that emptiness is form. Emptiness, because things are empty, then things are able to function in a way that is meaningful. So it's saying, for instance, one of the really important explanations that illustrates this point is if the mental afflictions were such that they were inherent in our minds, that our mind's ultimate nature was such that the mental afflictions were part of that, then we would not be able to free our minds of those faults. So the fact that our mind's ultimate true nature is that it's empty is what guarantees that the mental afflictions are not part of our essential mind's nature. They are an overlay. They are extrinsic to the mind's ultimate nature, and therefore, if we apply the proper antidote, then those things can be eliminated. Those things can be removed. So that's one of the assertions about, for instance, the teaching about the Buddha nature, Ratna Gocho Vibhaga, the Ulama's doctrine is essentially about that the mind's ultimate nature is that it's empty. And that's what makes it possible, because the mind is naturally pure in the sense of being empty. And that's what makes it possible for mental afflictions to be removed. So another way of describing it is that there's the word drova. Drova is mentioned in the opening verses of the of Nagarjuna's root treatise on wisdom. And he describes Buddha as having taught emptiness in such a way that its real meaning is that by perceiving the ultimate nature of dependent origination, which is emptiness, then you have the ability to put an end to what is called drova. Drova means elaboration. Elaboration means the multiplicity, the great variety of all our dualistic perceptions. All of those dualistic perceptions are representative of error, of illusion, of false perception. Things are not the way they appear. So the fact that we are able to perceive emptiness allows for the possibility to put an end to all of those conceptual elaborations. Here in this case, conceptual meaning thoughts of things as being self-existent as they appear to dualistic minds. So these are points that kind of can be drawn out from this second assertion that emptiness is form. So I say, because form is empty, then it is out of that emptiness that form is able to appear in the first place. Then the latter two are, then form is not that emptiness is not distinct from form, form is not distinct from emptiness, then those latter two formulations are usually one of the expressions that is given is what logical claim is being made about the relationship between relative truth and ultimate truth. The relationship, the logical relationship between relative truth and ultimate truth is they are moachik. Moachik means they're part of this, they're not separate from the very nature of things. So the emptiness of form is part of the nature of form. The relative truth aspect of form is also part of the nature of form. And those two things do not exist separately from one another. The moachik means they're essentially one. Relative truth and ultimate truth are part of the same single essential nature of things. And they're distinct only in the sense that conceptually, then dokpa tade means that in our minds, we conceive of them as things that are not identical to one another, right? So whatever is relative truth, you think of it as a kind of falsity. Whatever is ultimate truth, you think of it as a kind of ultimate reality. So in that sense, those two things are not consistent with one another. But that appearance of inconsistency is only something that our mind conceives of as being distinct. Dokpa tade is a description of how, for instance, in an apple, right? An apple has the quality of being produced, right, from the seed and the process of growing. That produced quality is one aspect of the apple, and then the apple also is impermanent, right? So that's another quality of the apple, is that it doesn't last. It continues to evolve and eventually fall from the tree and either get eaten or rot, right? So that quality of being produced and being impermanent are part and parcel of the apple. They're not distinguishable from the apple itself. And yet we make a distinction of them as different attributes of the apple. So it's only a conceptual distinction, whereas they represent part of the very nature of the apple itself. So that's typical of how the relationship between ultimate truth and relative truth also exists. They are part and parcel of the very nature of entity.
无论给早些的看书，电子主要是吧？电子主要电子动画有些，电子主要一个动画的是，电子大画的，电子无为了电子大画的是，是吧？电子主要一个。
Yang sudah di tensi Jawa dari tahun ini. Dari tahun ini mulai.
Tensi Jawa kan dulu tu kita ialah tu semua share tu kita dulu tahu ialah begitu. Tensi Jawa ini tongkat itu share. Tongkat ini share kan ialah mana ni? Tensi Jawa ini tongkat itu share. Ini tahu ini umur lama itu. Ini tahu. 给大小这个的主要印章，老王没有，对不对？东方女人地中东北就是下，东方地区就是下水什么啊？我的第一感觉，有的人他感觉我们入住给他，到特殊是的，中间的到这个是，我的有的人他地中东北就是下，东方地区就是下的，属东方属。东方属拉王的主人，东方的是，拉王的东方人呢，可能也要的现在店里用，可能拉王没有用过，可能现在店里，他现在店里用的是这个东方人是不了，所以属东方是属的拉王的主人，东方人的属原来的现在店里住，我店里现在店里住不也是。现在店里主要印章店主什么？现在店里主要印章，然后要把它做，能差不多。真的，但是我可能家里想，你这个两个去呢，我们这个两个就在那个我去了，几十万人呢，你的那老没打死了，我你其他就会呢，都会有打话，你这个这里。就拿来那个我去了，拿来老没打死，老不老来，我说去来，拿来老没打死，老来的，你这说的还不，我对上去麻死，是吧？你说那个不多，是吧？你两个你买到钱，没简单的给是几乎我是哪位呢？啊，这简单的给是我是这个变化的些，我在输入给他老没多麻死，我在天天说的看，什么天天都是都。
So this is very, we're talking about the difficult subject, talking about emptiness. We've mentioned some of the elements that are involved in the process of practicing. Just now we've been talking about the relationship between the relative truth aspect of things and their ultimate truth nature. So another way to sort of identify what are the key elements of this entire enterprise, this entire endeavor to gain this deep understanding, is in relation to what is called the object to be refuted, or the object to be negated. The word is gotcha. So usually, in this case, we're talking about, so there are different kinds of things to be eliminated. So the objects, the mental afflictions are called langi gotcha. They're the things that we want to eliminate, right? Mental afflictions are the things that we want to get rid of. Then there's another kind of thing to be refuted. That's the rikpe gotcha. Rikpe gotcha means the object to be refuted in relation to our philosophical or logical understanding. Then when we start examining that notion of the object to be refuted, we're sort of entering the field of just philosophy or spiritual, spiritual, inquiry generally, or more specifically, we could say in Buddhism there are 4 different schools. So the 2 lower schools are considered the kind of the realist schools and maybe even naive realism. From the point of view of Prasangika, even the Yogacara school is a kind of realist school in the sense that they posit a real mental nature or mental essence. But then even if we just focus on the so-called middle way school, in the middle way school, then there are two main divisions. One is called the Swatantrikas, and the other is called the Prasangikas. And that is based on it's a fundamental difference on what is the type of reasoning that needs to be employed in order to prove the thesis that things are empty. So the thesis that is being proved differs for the Swatantrika school versus the Prasangika school. So they both claim to be explaining emptiness, the same emptiness. But their understanding of what that emptiness is in a very significant way different. So the Swatantrika school, the word Swatantrika means, Swatantra means independent, which is here relevant in a broader sense because the entities are not independent. But this is saying independent, meaning that an independent syllogism is the necessary methodology, logical methodology that must be employed in order to prove, in order to establish that the opponent's point of view, whether it's a non-Buddhist or a Buddhist, is incorrect, and to establish the validity of the thesis about emptiness. The Prasangikas say that's not possible because the object to be refuted is much more radical for the Prasangikas, from the Prasangika point of view. Prasanga is the name of it's called an indirect proof. I'm not a philosopher in the terms of professional philosopher sense or an academic, but the term or let's just say indirect. What is it for Prasanga is direct proof. No. Prasanga means the common phrase is reductio ad absurdum, meaning that you show that it's an indirect proof. An indirect proof meaning that you prove your thesis by showing the opponent's position to be untenable. And by showing the opponent's position to be untenable, then you force him or her into a position where the only alternative that is left is the Prasangika's point of view. And that's a very important distinction. So, for instance, the Swatantrikas, right? So we say the Swatantrikas are scholars like Bhava Viveka or even to some extent the Yogacara, Yogacara, Swatantrika Madhumika, like Shantarakshita, for instance. So they say that when you say that things are, the term is and that's what it is. Dendam tu ngoni ki mes. Dendam di chabat bitar kore mato.
Chikara di ngoni ngoni me ngoni di yesu.
Ngoni.
Rao tu ngoni ramshi. Yamat tu yesu.
Yeah.
Yamat tu yesu.
Yeah. Ta karsana dene karsa kuzok tu kuranto ngoni ki yesu. Dendam tu
Yes.
Yeah. So this is kind of a very subtle point, and there's some. I'll give you one example that Chandakirti uses to refute the Svatantrikas. So there's a notion that things are not truly existent. So Dembar Madruba, Dembar Meva is not truly existent. Then the Svatantrikas would accept that kind of state. That to say that things are empty means they're not truly existent. But they will not. So the Svatantrikas, when they explain the object to be refuted, right? So they take an ordinary object that we perceive. This is kind of technical language of the philosophical treatise. Lona mela name wangi. Lona means a perception that's an unerring perception. So I said sometimes our senses can be distorted. So we see two moons, double moons, we see double, or we look at a light and then you look away and there's the after image of the light. So that's not real. So that's an impaired mind. So we're saying Lona me means an unimpaired mind. Lona me la name wangi shatam. Adi ane kegyo Lona me la name wangi shatam yin sigaro. Lona me la name wangi shatam yin sigaro. So according to the so there's some important points that we can use to make this thing which is very relevant and critical. So we say the thing does not exist merely because it appears to an unimpaired mind, which, by the way, is in fact what the Prasangikas assert. The Prasangikas assert that non-analyzing ordinary perception, that's the only degree, that's the only basis that we have for positing that things are conventional entities. But the Svatantrikas say, wait a minute, if that's the full extent of what the nature of ordinary objects is, then they don't really exist at all. So they say, it's not merely the fact that they are appearing to an unerring mind, but so it's saying that ordinary perceiving mind, when it perceives the object as though it has some kind of essential nature. So those two things together are essential for positing the existence of relative truth objects. So the fact that it appears to an unerring mind, and when it appears to an unerring mind, it presents some kind of unique essence to that mind. Those two things together are what establish the existence of relative truth objects. Right? So they have some appearance of having an essence, and that, from the point of view of relative truth, is not false, right? So what is false is that if you take out the fact that it's appearing to that unerring mind, the fact that it has some kind of essence sort of independently or truly independently of being even perceived by an unerring mind, that's what we need to refute. That's the Svatantrika's position, right? So saying that, so to that extent, the appearance of an essence that relative truth objects have is not mistaken. However, when we examine what its ultimate nature is, we determine that appearance of having an independent essence is not real, and that's emptiness, according to the Svatantrika. Okay, so then Chandakirti says very what should I say, in a very sort of penetrating way. He says, well, if that's true, then when you perceive the ultimate nature of that object, that in a relative sense has an essence, then that realization of its true nature is actually annihilating the object. It's making the object disappear, because those two things are inconsistent. So you're saying when you perceive emptiness, emptiness is in fact destroying that relative truth nature that's appearing and that you are claiming is the way that we validate its relative truth nature. I'm not saying you understand it. I'm saying that the argument is that's an argument that's saying therefore that claim that at the level of relative truth, things do have conventional essence is false, according to the present ego. So that's an argument that's saying the Swatantrika position is untenable, is mistaken. Because the very fact that the thing appears to have an essence is what's false about it. So that's its relative truth nature. Yes, it is, but it's completely false from the point of view of ultimate truth. From the point of view of ultimate truth, that appearance of some kind of essence is not there, doesn't exist. So that's a much more radical position, and that's where that's kind of the pivotal difference between those positions about what's being refuted. So, for instance, it's saying, Karasadi, there's a statement, Karasadi, Krishna be top saying the Habe Nyamsha.
Nyamsha is in shape and load to shape to do
the Karasa, Sangi Mayimata.
Nyamsha is Nyamsha is society.
Then not true,
Nyamsha is Nyamsha is I didn't Gyuto, Papa in the Gyuto, Papa in a Gyuto Yasham. Nyamsha is in a road. I never did do that to Yamana,
yeah. So it says, so according to the Prasangika, they say, Hakpe Nyamsha Yeshe. Hakpa means Arya. So the Arya means the person who can perceive the ultimate truth directly. Hakpe Nyamsha Yeshe means when the Arya is in that state of absorption. Stop. Yeah. Oh, okay. So there are other points which okay. Okay. He mentioned a lot of different points that are relevant to the discussion, and I think he's trying to keep focus on things that he thinks are. Yeah. Right. So there's
Yes.
So, Rinpoche mentioned two verses which are really beautiful and are kind of capture the essence of what's being discussed here. One is from a sutra. I can't remember the name of the sutra, but it's quoted. It's quoted by Chandrakirti. It's quoted in his Prasanapada. It's quoted in all the philosophical texts. And many of you that I remember several years ago, Khensur was teaching a class here where I was talking about how to meditate on emptiness, and he referred to this verse, and then he said, "This is a verse that we should all memorize. We should all recite." I don't remember. Well, I haven't memorized it. I can't quote it from line for line, but it's a beautiful verse. I have it on my refrigerator. Anyway, it says, "Ganshi kenle kieva." This is paraphrasing the verse. Ganshi kenle kieva. That thing which is conditioned, that which arises due to condition, that is an unarisen thing. That is the thing which has not arisen. Right? So what that means is when things arise, that means when things occur in ordinary experience, they don't occur in such a way that they arise with a real essence. So therefore, they're unoriginated because they don't have an essence that comes into being. They're merely some perceived object of dualistic awareness. And then the second line says exactly that. That does not have it has no essence which has come into being. It has no real nature that has come into being. And then it says, that thing which depends on conditions, that thing which is that depends on conditions, which is, relies on conditions, that thing is empty. So that's saying form is like that. Right? Form is something which is produced by conditions. But when it comes into being, it doesn't come into being in such a way that it possesses a real nature, a real essence. Yeah. So, and then the last line of that says, very beautiful. The end of the line says, the person who understands this has achieved mindfulness. That person has achieved mindfulness. Then that's really, it means if you can appreciate that, and if you can comprehend that, and you can cultivate that, then you are in a state of spiritual awareness, and then then you will be able to live your life in a proper way. So you're almost suggesting that the last time. So anyway, that's one verse, a sutra verse. Then there's a very famous verse from Nagarjuna's root treatise on wisdom. I think it's the 24th chapter. Very big. Yeah, chapter 24, which is on the Four Noble Truths. Really beautiful, very extensive discussion about. It starts out with the realists saying, "Oh, you Madhyamikans, you're destroying the Buddha's teaching of the Four Noble Truths because you say things are not real. Therefore, there's no suffering, there's no origination, those things don't really exist." So then, first it starts out presenting the opponent's position, the Buddhist realist position that is at odds with Nagarjuna's view, and then he responds to it bit by bit, saying, "Sorry, you're the ones that are in mistake. If you believe that things are real, you cannot posit correctly the doctrine of the Four Noble Truths. You cannot establish the real teaching of the Dharma." And then there's a famous verse that says, "Denjing dewa zhunga gang," right? That which arises dependently, right? Using the word paticca samuppada. Those things which arise dependently, those things are asserted to be empty. So that means those things which are depending on conditions, which are causally produced, those things are empty of any self-existent nature. Then it says, Tony, that's that. Then the third line is another really beautiful phrase that needs to be better understood. It's a dene takwa. Dene takwa literally means dependently ascribed. In Sanskrit words, upadaya pranyapti. Pranyapti means something that is designated by the mind. The mind creates the appearance of entity. And then it means it based on conditions, right? It's dependently ascribed. Meaning and the phrase is, for instance, the self, how does the self exist? The self is something that exists because it is dependently ascribed on the basis of the five standards. So understanding the meaning of what it means to be dependently ascribed is really gets at the heart of the psychological process by which we perceive things as being self-existent. And so and so that understanding that things are really only nominally existent, only nominally ascribed on the basis of some conditions that lead us to perceive things as being existing, as if they were something objectively real. Then the person who So the first one is saying, right? That thing which is dependently arisen, that is asserted to be empty. Okay? So that second line is refuting the extreme of nihilism. I'm sorry, eternalism. Saying, if the thing exists, it must be self-existent. The only way we can claim that things exist is if they were real. And we differentiate between real things and totally fictional things. All real things are things which exist independently. So when you assert emptiness, that they're not, those things which have the appearance of being real are actually void of any self-existent essence, that eliminates the eternalistic extreme. So then when you say the thing is dependently ascribed, then that is saying, but when we assert emptiness, we're not saying the thing is non-existent, but we're saying its existence is something which is merely nominally valid. And so that eliminates the extreme of nihilism. And so the last line of the verse says, this is the middle way. This is the true middle path in the sense that it avoids the two extremes of eternalism and nihilism. So these verses are all meant to be ways of understanding this fourfold formulation. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not distinct from form, form is not distinct from So then we say this third description of what the relative nature of things is, what constitutes their relative truth aspect. So that phrase, things are dependently ascribed, or sometimes saying merely ascribed, or only nominally existent, or they're mere names, right? All of these terms are meant to say they don't have any independent essence that's necessary to validate them. So then in Larishamu So this is another So most of you are all familiar with Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chömul, right? Great Lamrim Chömul, great treatise on the stages of the path. So the last half of the book is really the most dense and the most detailed and the most philosophically kind of challenging part of the whole treatise. Then
another issue is
yeah. So we're coming to the end of the class. So what do you want to be in addition to this first point? Okay. So first is this discussion that's found in the Lamrim Chömul. So the Lamrim Chömul, the final section of the Lamrim Chömul is on so-called Vipassana. The section on Vipassana, and it has a very long discussion of the object to be refuted that we have mentioned here. And there are two sort of, what should I say, approaches that are used to address the notion of what's the object to be refuted. The first one is by far the more detailed one. It's called Chap Chewa Luk. Chap Chewa Luk means the position which is too extreme in relation to refuting self-existence. So it's saying, what it's essentially saying is there are individuals, self-styled Buddhist scholars, it's probably talking about Tibetans, his contemporaries, Lama Tsongkhapa, and saying there are certain persons who go too far in how they interpret what the doctrine is of the perfection of wisdom. So saying they say that if you refute the self-existent essence of things, then there is nothing left at all. There is no relative aspect to the object at all that can be positive, as being conventionally valid. Okay, and so Tsongkhapa really goes great lengths to criticize that view. So there's a fine line there. In fact, the object to be refuted is that the thing has any independent existence of its own. At the same time, Tsongkhapa is saying that does not refute its conventional, unanalyzed nature. And it's that latter point is the point that he wants to address. So he gives 3 criteria for saying what it means to be conventionally existent. Not conventionally real, but conventionally valid or conventionally existent. And so he says, one is, it has to be something that is Jorden Trakpa. So a conventional mind is something that is universally accepted as being true at the level of ordinary experience. So I'm saying, if you plant a seed and it's a seed of a particular flower, it's going to bloom as that flower. It's not going to bloom as something else. So there is that let's say consistency, or there is that connection, valid connection between cause and effect, which everybody acknowledges. Nobody thinks that if you plant rice, it's going to grow as barley. So that's something that is accepted conventionally in a universal sense. So experience confirms it, you can say. Our ordinary experience confirms it. Then there's a second point. The second point is that no other conventionally valid awareness refutes it. So staying still at the level of unanalyzed existence, sometimes some element of ordinary experience can be rejected. So one example would be subtle impermanence, right? Our ordinary experience is that we think things continue to exist, but then we can establish through reasoning, not about its ultimate nature, but that conventional quality of it it's not something that persists. Or as Rinpoche mentioned, he said, for instance, if you look out in a farmer's field and you see a scarecrow, you might not think it's a scarecrow, you might think it's the farmer. So that conventional awareness, which sees a scarecrow but mistakenly perceives it to be a person, if you walk up to it, then your conventional mind can correct you and affirm to you, no, it's not the farmer, it's the scarecrow. So that's a second factor, is that another type of conventional awareness can invalidate some kind of mistaken view about ordinary experience. And then the third one is that, and this is the important one, that the type of awareness that is trying to determine the ultimate nature of the conventional object also does nothing to invalidate its conventional status. So that's the third criteria, and that's the one that Tsongkhapa says that many of his contemporaries did not fully appreciate. That nothing about the mind that determines the ultimate nature of an object of ordinary experience does anything to invalidate its ordinary status, its ordinary validity. So when you say the thing is not self-existent, you are not saying it is non-existent. You are not saying causes can't produce results. You're saying that the appearance of being real causes is a false appearance. So that's an important discussion. It's very kind of the criteria for establishing the validity of ordinary existence. And then Rinpoche wanted me to say one last thing, which was, I think, then there's another quote, another passage from Nagarjuna's treatise, the jewel garland, Ratnavali, which has some, it's not exclusively about right view, but it has some significant discussions about the nature of ultimate reality. And one of them describes the person. Kibu means Purusha, means a person, an individual, and what their status is. And so the conventional or more common formulation is that the individual consists of 5 skandhas. In Ratnavali, there's a different formulation that also is found in other scriptures, which describes the person in terms of 6 constituents. And they're not at odds with the 5 skandhas, but the 6 constituents are 4 physical elements: earth, water, fire, and air, which correspond to form skandha. And then the 5th constituent is consciousness, which corresponds to the other 4 skandhas primarily. And then it adds a 6th constituent, which is space. And space refers to the pores on your skin, the openings of the nostrils and the ears and the eyes and so on. And so saying within the individual, it goes through each one of those one by one, and says the person is not the earth element, not the water element, not the fire element, not the air element. It's not consciousness alone, and it's the person is not space either. And then it says, and so it says, if the person cannot be identified among any one of those 6 constituents, then what does the person consist of? Which is implying there's no self-existent person. But then it goes on to say the person is based upon the collection of those 6 constituents. And that's the same thing as saying that the person is a mere ascription, a mere nominally ascribed entity on the basis of, as I was saying before, we experience our 5 skandhas, so also we experience our 6 constituents, and on the basis of that ordinary experience, then we fabricate, we conjure the awareness of some entity that is the subject or the controlling agent of those constituents or skandhas. And that such a person exists. We talk about the person. We talk to other persons. We think of ourselves as persons in a conventional sense. And such a person does exist, but only nominally. So that's kind of the final statement being made. I see hands rising. Rinpoche wants to end the class. Okay, so he'd like to, we'll run past the 12 o'clock deadline. He knows there's some questions. He asked you to hold the questions for the afternoon session, and hopefully we'll have time to. And also, Rinpoche wants to resume the class at 1:30. Okay? So, yeah.